As part of the Distinguished Lecture Series, UNESCO MGIEP invites speakers of global eminence to spark transformative ideas for our shared future. These lectures are expected to inspire a larger international dialogue on a more peaceful and sustainable world, built through better education, inclusive spaces, and global citizenship. So we have today with us Zigor. He's the Senior Project Manager of Fun Learning Department at Ubisoft. So I know a lot of you are gamers here, so there is no need to really introduce Ubisoft, but it's an organization that has developed world-renowned games such as The Division, Far Cry, Watch Dogs, Assassin's Creed, the franchisee. At Ubisoft, Zigor is specifically in charge of developing games that provide the player with actionable knowledge and expertise. Today, he'll speak to us about the role of digital pedagogy such as gaming in education. May I please invite Mr. Eric Falt, Director and UNESCO representative to Bhutan, India, Maldives, and Sri Lanka, to say a few words. Thank you.
Namaste. Ab sabhi ka UNESCO New Delhi mein swagat hai. I would also like to warmly welcome in particular Dr. Juarros to India and New Delhi, and thank my good colleague and friend Ananta, Director of UNESCO MGIEP, to give us this great opportunity for learning. And I think today's lecture cannot be more relevant to the issues that we are facing in education. Indeed, we now understand, I think, that we cannot complete an education anymore. The constant changes in today's world require us to continue learning throughout our lives, and this is why UNESCO as a whole believes and advocates for the importance of lifelong learning. We also believe that learning should be joyful and engaging, not just boring transmission of information and pure learning. However, we do see also that nowadays all around the world, education has become probably overly competitive, and the joy of learning is often forgotten in times of endless preparation for assessments and exams. I know that Dr. Juarros has a very distinguished career, both in technology and publishing, and that he's an expert of making learning fun. The current technologies have certainly expanded the possibilities of how learning happens. Learning through games is just one of such examples that can potentially change the landscape of education. I'm very proud, I would say, that our colleagues at UNESCO MGIEP are spearheading this important and innovative area of learning. I'm very excited to hear the lecture myself as part of my own lifelong learning experience. Dhanyavad.
On stage, I'd just like to give you the hashtag today. If you'd like to tweet, that's hashtag DL series, where DL stands, as you can understand, for Distinguished Lectures. So hashtag DL series for any of you who would like to share this on social media. I'd like now to invite Dr. Ananta Durayappa, Director, UNESCO MGIEP, to please say a few words.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm going to be a little bit playing it from the hip, because I've just got off the plane from a long flight, been on painkillers for the last week for a knee injury. I think that toxic cocktail might have some fun, where I kind of don't control and say the usual UN things and say things which come from the heart. Thank you, Eric, for letting us, inviting us and letting us use this space. I'm looking forward to a very strong relationship between the New Delhi office and UNESCO MGIEP. What I thought I would do to start off with is, and my staff has just said I have to control this as well. I'm not sure what comes after this. I thought we would tell you a little bit about the institute, and the best way to do it is tell you what the manifesto is. And one of the things that we really, our mandate at the institute is building peaceful and sustainable societies, and it's about education for human flourishing. And I'm going to leave you just with one for you to go and mull over it back once you've left this lecture, is the education that we have right now is only for building human capital. And we want to sort of say it's for human flourishing. Education as a constitutive element of our well-being, not instrumental. It could be instrumental, that doesn't matter. That's an externality. But the real objective, it's for our own well-being. We learn for the fun of it. And it releases dopamine surges into our brains when we learn. It becomes addictive. And that's why we go into gaming. We want to make learning an addictive practice among all of us. And it's fun, as Eric said. Learning should be fun. I don't know how many of you had fun when you were going through school. I think many of you are still in school. Do you have fun? You're too old. The gentleman there who's got as much white beard as me is holding his hand up. Must have been those days. I think we were part of the hippie era at that time. The same time. Yeah. So it should be fun. And if you and what we do at MGIEP is that we move really towards a research excellence center. We draw a lot on the neurosciences. That's why I mentioned dopamine. We have many advisors on our board, as well as among our projects are some of the top neuroscientists from the world, psychologists. They help us work with the games that we develop. They help us with the curriculums that we develop at the Institute, and also even the digital platform that we've been producing at the Institute. You can read, so I'm not going to do the typical way that I read exactly what's on the screen, because all of you can read, so you don't need me to read that. What I want you to take home message is that we are willing to take risk, because without risk we do not learn. We are willing to fail, because without failing you don't know what went wrong and how you can improve yourself. So that's the DNA at the Institute. It's always, we just had an external evaluation. One of the best findings was they said that this institute is like no other UN entity. It's more like a startup, innovative, aggressive, and takes a lot of risk. I'm quite happy with that. I'm not sure about headquarters. I'm supposed to use this. This is the 4 pillars that run across our whole program. It's based on some of the latest research findings. We start off with mindfulness. We use actually Einstein's EMC squared. We've taken away the equal. So you got mindfulness, which is basically about being self-aware, understanding your own emotions. We spend a lot of time on that. We've got empathy, is about understanding the other. The compassion is about doing something about it. And then the critical inquiry is not to make sure that you don't get tricked. The critical inquiry is about questioning everything that has been thrown at you. You never take anything as the truth until you have challenged it, gone through it, you deconstructed it, you reconstruct it, and then if it feels that that's the way, then it's fine. And in that whole process of doing that, you have this socio-emotional resiliency in your system. So that's what we call the socio-emotional dimension of our work. Firing Gandhi neurons. Gandhi neurons was termed by a neuroscientist from UC San Diego. What we talked about is firing it. You got to activate the neural network. It's about activating neural networks that run from the rational thinking part of the brain to the emotional part of the human brain. And actually, people have found it. They've actually done experiments with the 4 pillars, and they have been scanning the brains, and they actually can see these neural networks emerge as you're going through those 4 components. Page 67, Daniel Goleman's book on emotional intelligence. You'll find it. I was so excited when I saw that, because when I was just reading the book and you could see it emerging, and they have got the documented evidence for that. So we did some of our own games. World Rescue is about the SDGs. Cantor's World is something for economics. I'm an economist by training. I teach economics, I lecture economics. And the last time I lectured economics, I nearly fell asleep in my own lecture. It was so boring with all the mathematics. The kids were looking at me, and so we sort of said, well, let's develop a game. We did that. We tested this out at the latest INSEE, which is the Indian Society for Ecological Economics, and I could not believe it. They were having a whale of a time. They were actually laughing. Economics students laughing while they were studying economics. Never heard of it. Never had that experience in my 20 years teaching economics. So games do have an impact. So these are some of the things that people who use games in their classrooms. This gentleman was part of the team that developed Kung Fu Panda, who's now helping us develop and animate some of our curriculums on the socio-emotional learning. Matthew Faber basically just wrote a book on empathy and games, and he uses gaming for developing empathy. You can meet all these people when you come to WISAC in November. They will be giving some keynotes as well as catalytic sessions. This gentleman is really interesting. He's a teacher that every kid would love to have a teacher. I went to one of his classrooms. He teaches in Toronto, and he uses games. He actually uses the original Assassin's Creed, and he has a lesson plan and learning outcomes, and he goes through with the kids. I've never seen a happier bunch of kids before. And they do very well in the exams as well. They can't get out of the exam systems, but they do very well in the exams as well. Right? Just a little bit of TAC 2018. This is something that we tried last year. This is where we basically get the best minds around the world. Digital pedagogies. Last year we had about 1,700 people turn up from 75 countries. This year we're going to go a little bit smaller, but get a lot more quality. And we are looking for very good quality papers. I see a lot of young people here. I'm not dismissing the old ones. You can still sneak in. But it's a great place, and you get to meet some of the best minds working in this field. And the call for proposals is now released. That's that. I want to basically now talk about Zigor. I'm not going to try to talk about make his whole name. I'm going to mutilate it. Eric did pretty well with that last name. I was wondering who he was talking about, and it was like, finally I felt it was him. So, Zigor, we met about a year ago. We had breakfast in Paris, and he just basically came across a person who was just not happy with the existing systems, had some very brilliant ideas, and more pleasantly shocked was he was coming from a corporate money-making capitalist company, Ubisoft, but they were interested in the education, but not from it is a company, it makes money, but they were really looking on how to make an impact in the education system. To set up a group and to allow him to take a lead in it means they are serious. So We were very happy to have him agree to come and give us this distinguished lecture. He's not your typical person as you see from the way he's dressed. We had to force him not to wear his floral pants, so he decided that jeans would be fine. He's a typical gamer. I remember the people that we worked with on World Rescue when we first met them in Budapest. They walked into the room and they had tattoos, they had the earrings, but they were some of the best people that we worked with. They developed that whole game on which is called World Rescue. And you should play it. It's quite a bit of fun. It took me quite some time to even figure taking the birds through those mazes. It gets your neural networks running. So I won't keep much any longer. I want to listen to what Zigor has to say. And if you think that you want to hear more from him, come to WISAC in November, where he'll be also attending and giving some catalytic sessions as well. It'll be an interesting conference this year in WISAC because we're going to be having an outcome where we're going to be asking for proposing, let me put this word, proposing to develop global guidelines on digital content because there's so much coming out there and it's coming like rapid fire from machine guns. Some are good, but many are also very bad. There's no pedagogical content. They're just flashy stuff, video stuff. Many of them say gaming. There's not much gaming elements because there's criteria for gaming. Zigor will talk about that. So I welcome you to come to WISAC, be part of this movement. And I'm going to ask Zigor to give his lecture.
Well, thank you, Ananta, for the introduction. Thank you all for being here. So I'm Zigor, work at Ubisoft, as you already know. And where I started a research project on how to make games for learning. And it all started quite unexpectedly, actually. It started when I went to visit my son's school. I have a kid who's 4 years old, and just before he entered kindergarten, I went to visit his school. And during this visit, I came across the typical classrooms for kids slightly older than him, about 6 years old. And so it was the typical classrooms with the blackboard at the end, the big desk for the teacher, and these small desks for small kids, all neatly lined in rows and columns. And for some reason, that completely depressed me, but deeply depressed me. And I thought, I don't know why, but I thought about my grandfather. He is my grandfather. It's a real thought of my grandfather. He was 17 at the time. And the previous year, he was kicked out of school because he was considered by his teacher as being useless and probably a little bit mentally retarded. And so he was passionate by mechanics. And he went to work with this French company called Latécoère, who is one of the pioneers of aviation in the world. And so he worked on the first planes that were conceived and constructed in France. And later on, he went to work for Renault, the French car maker. And he conceived and built for Renault the very first assembly line that was ever built in France. And so this guy, when he was 17, was considered retarded when he was in school. And what shocked me is that I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about the classroom he attended before he was kicked out. And it was probably exactly the same as the one my kid would go in a couple of years. And that's what depressed me. Because look at the plane. This is only my grandfather, but look at the plane. Just imagine how life was at the time. These were the planes they had. There were almost no cars, no television, no internet, no telephones, no computers, most of the people were working in the field while growing in agriculture. I mean, the world has changed so much between this time and nowadays. How come education has not changed as well? Can we maintain this kind of education when the world has changed so much? I don't think so. I think something has to change here. So I went to see my boss, and so I told him my experience, and I told him this was maybe something we could do in this field, and he understood actually what I said, what I felt, because he has a daughter who's very dyslexic, so he had to fight for years against the educational system. So he perfectly understood, and he told me, okay, go, do it. So that's how I started this research program, this research project. The goal being to play and learn at the same time. The idea is to provide, while you play, provide the player with hard skills and soft skills that could eventually get him a job. So this is no joke. We're pretty serious about it. But it was important to have fun at the same time. This is what Ubisoft does. We do video games. We do, I believe, good video games. Artists sell very well. So I think we can do games for something else than just killing enemies, aliens, or this kind of thing. Why don't we use what we know to do things for the greater good? So that was the plan. And when I started the project, so I needed to recruit people, and so I started to talk about it, and I got a set of reactions that were quite upsetting or unsettling sometimes. And the very first one was, oh, you want to do serious games? And I was like, no, not at all, in fact. I don't want to do serious games. I want to do fun games. What's the point in doing serious games? What's the point in getting bored when you play a game? No, the game has to be fun. Otherwise, there's no point. And I strongly believe that gaming and learning are not enemies, are not opposite. Actually, as Ananta and Eric pointed out, gaming is something intrinsically, well, all the kids, the way they discover life is by playing. So playing and learning are really, really completely merged together. And I found this quote, oh no. So that's why I was saying before, I want high-quality graphics and animation. I don't want crappy games. Basically the equivalent of what we call AAA games. There's no need to lower the bar just because we are dealing with education stuff or with learning stuff. So I found this quote from Chris Crawford. Chris Crawford was one of the pioneers of game design. He worked at Atari in the 80s, and he wrote this. I completely agree with him. I mean, learning and playing and education and learning are one and same thing, in fact. So, like an answer, I'm not going to read it, right? Okay. So the second kind of reaction I got is, oh, you want to do education stuff, like education stuff, boring stuff. And I was like, again, something bothered me about the very word education, because again, education sounds very serious, but it is serious. It is serious that it's something very important. Education is very important. Educating people today means shaping the future. This is not something you want to take lightly. This is not something I feel qualified for. So, and on top of that, I come from a French system, educational system, which is very public, very Republican, very free as well. And it always bothers me when private sector wants to take over education, because I don't know how maximizing profits and educating people can combine well. So instinctively, I don't like it very much. But education is also a serious world, as in boring, because our experience, at least my experience of school and college, was extremely boring. So I don't want boring. Again, I want fun. I want to play and learn at the same time. And I found this distinction some people make, and I agree with him. It's a way to distinguish both. Is education being passive, because in the classrooms we just seated and listening to a guy who's taking things that we're not really interested in most of the time. And you do that in order to build, the goal is to build a curriculum. So grades and notes, and it's based on extrinsic motivation. The grades and the notes is like, a candy you give to a kid. Oh, you've been good, take a candy. Whereas learning is a much more active process. You are an actor of the learning process. And that's much more efficient and much more fun, but essentially much more efficient than just passively listening to somebody. It's also, instead of building a curriculum, what you build in active pedagogies and when you learn is curiosity. And curiosity is, as you know, is one of the main engines of learning. You learn because you're curious about things. And the more curious you are, the better and the more you learn. And it's based on intrinsic motivation. It feels good to know new things. It feels intrinsically good. And that's much more motivating than just the candy they give you at the end of the year at school. So another quote from Joe Ito. Joe Ito was the director of the Media Lab at the MIT. And I love this one. Education is what people do to you. Learning is what you do to yourself. And so this is the path I wanted to go. That's why I ended up calling the project Fun Learning, fun as opposed to serious, and learning as opposed to education. So I had to choose the methodology. So the big word at the moment was, and still is, gamification. So I looked into gamification, but what I found is that most of the gamification apps are, in fact, very traditional content, just with nice graphics and sugar-coated with a shallow layer of interactivity. But it doesn't change the fundamental of the strategic, the pedagogic strategy, which is one-to-many. I give you the content. You don't have to look for it. So it's still a passive, even if it's some interactivity, it's still mostly a very passive experience. So I didn't like it, so I tried to go another way, and it's what I call learnification. Is take the core mechanics of a video game and inject their pedagogical content, so using the game itself. So we get the active thing, we get the fun thing, but instead of learning how to kill aliens or enemies or whatever, we learn useful things. So the other reaction is, following that, is, okay, but the games are not meant for learning, so the mechanics of the games are not meant for learning. And the funny thing is that this remark came from lots of game designers themselves, so game developers themselves, and they are extremely wrong. Actually, games are extremely good at teaching because they have to teach you. What is the first thing that you have to do before playing a game? Any game. I mean, cricket, football, poker, chess, backgammon. Exactly. You have to learn the rules of the game. And what are the rules of the game in a video game? Well, you have to know what is the main goal you have to go for. What are the tools, the means at your disposal, all the items you can use at your disposal, how to use them, can you combine them, etc., etc., and you need to learn how to use them. And then how the environment works. So all these, when you start a game, you don't know. So somebody has to teach you that. And, okay, I'm going to switch to Zelda. So give you a short demo, 5-minute recess. And it's the very beginning of this game from Nintendo. If I can get this thing to work. Oh, needs a code, sorry. Demo effect. So when you start a game, you don't know anything about anything. In fact, you're a bit like a newborn, because you have to learn everything: the environment, who you are, what you have to do, etc., etc. And I picked up this game because, well, you will see. So this is the very beginning of the game. Okay, so now I can play. I'm going to go fast. Okay, not explain. There's nothing much to explain. I have to open the door.
That is a Shiva slate. Take it. It will help guide you after your long slumber.
Sorry, I successfully opened the door. I'm going to open the next one. Use the same mechanic.
Up to the pedestal. That will show you the way.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I'm out. So, you see the cave, the hero as naked as decency permits in water. Then the tunnel that leads to the lights. Well, that's a not so subtle allegory of birth, right? And this is what a player is when he starts a game. He's like a newborn that has to explore and learn everything he needs to know. So the only thing you know now is that your name is Link, that you are the hero, but that you knew already, and that you have all this huge, huge world to discover. This is only a fraction of the map of the game, which we have calculated must be about 64 square kilometers. In real life, it would be 64 square kilometers, which is huge. So this is what I wanted to show you. I'm going to switch back to the presentation. You have to learn what's the main goal, means, tools, etc., 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 and you have nobody around you to help you, because we have to suppose, even if it's not true, but we have to suppose that the player is alone at home in his couch in front of his screen. So the game is the teacher, and there's no way around it. Every game, the first thing a video game has to do is teach you how to play the game. And so the interesting part, this is what we're going to see now, is how he does it. He does it through the narrative, the missions, and the environment. Narrative, so it immerses the player into a fantasy. And this is important because it concentrates you. It limitates your world to a certain world, so you're concentrating on what you're doing. And makes you feel important, which is not bad at all. It's always good. It provides the goals and provides meaning to his actions. And this is very important because this is what the traditional education system fails to do. You go to any class, you have the teacher telling you things, and you don't know why you have to learn that. And that's very unsettling, and it doesn't help. So the more you know why you do the things, the more you learn, and the better you learn. And so this is what we do. And the missions as well. And this is very interesting, because the mission is nothing but problem solving, with all the steps of problem solving. You are blocked somewhere, you are locked into a place or whatever, you want to move forward, but you don't know how to. So you need to find the information that would allow you to pass this barrier or something. So for that, you have to look information, you have to explore your surroundings, find what you need, and then, and this is a learning mechanic, you have to produce hypotheses and then test them. And it is a trial and error process. And until you find the right solution, and when the right solution is found, you can move forward. And this is nothing but project-based learning. And what the game designers do, and they do very well, is to take great care of the learning curve, or the difficulty curve, to keep the player in the flow. But this is something you have in education as well, the flow. Things don't have to be too easy because it gets boring, or not have to be too difficult because at some point you leave the pad and you go to something else. So it's very important to keep in the flow. And we know, well, video games developers know how to do that very well. And error is encouraged. When you do an error in a traditional system, you get punished because you have a bad grade, you don't have your diploma, or whatever. Error in an active environment, active learning environment like this is encouraged. And it's a good thing, because when you make mistakes, it's because you tried something. You tried something because you thought. So it's good to think and not to be shy and to try things because it's the best way to learn. And again, this is nothing but project-based learning. The environment supports the narrative. Gives you opportunities to explore, to experiment, and to relax. you're supposed to laugh at relax. But in fact, it's a very important learning mechanic. It's something called spaced learning. You probably heard of it. The basic idea is that if you have a learning session that lasts 4 hours in a row with no interruptions, this is the bar at the top, well, your brain shrinks at some point. Well, not really, but your brain activity shrinks. So your brain is active for the first hour or so, a bit less after that, and the last 2 hours, there's almost no brain activity related to the subject at hand. Whereas you take the same 4 hours of learning, but you space them with moments of 10 minutes of relaxing, of thinking of something completely different, and then when you measure the brain activity, is constant through the 4 hours. And the very funny thing is that the more you space the bars, the better the results. It's counterintuitive, but this is the way it works. And why does it work that way? It's because a mechanical process, well, a learning mechanic, which is called retrieval, is the fact that when you do a pause, you have to remember what you did the first hour. So this mechanic of going and fetch from your memory what you already learned to get back into it, this is what's called retrieval, and it's a very important learning mechanic. And if you follow the idea, as you go further into the idea, you can do what's called interleaved learning. You're going to mix subjects. So you enhance the retrieval process, you enhance learning. So you can learn something, I don't know, mathematics, let's say A is mathematics, B is history. So it works much better that way. And so what you do typically in a video game, because you use that in the video game, so typically what you do is that, you know, the next mission, let's say these are missions, the next mission is going to be the same thing that the first one, but a bit more difficult, you know, adding difficulty. And that's the difficulty curve and the learning curve, then the way you build it. And you can complexify things a little bit, and again, something we do in video games, is at some point you have to mix the things. You know how to use one tool, then later on you will learn how to use another tool, and at some point you will have to use both, combine the two tools to get to where you want to go. So this mechanic, which is an essential mechanic of learning, a very powerful mechanic of learning, is already applied even for violently stupid and stupidly violent video games, is the mission thing, the progress through the game. So it's something we know very well how to do. So this act of retrieval plus repetition leads to what we call consolidation. Consolidation is when you commit what you've learned into your long-term memory. It's when things become automatic. You don't even have to think about it. Remember driving. The first time you got behind the wheel, I don't know for you, but for me it was, I thought I will never get it. I will never succeed in driving a car because it was too many information or too much information, too many things to coordinate. And, well, over time, like anybody else, it becomes something completely automatic. And you can drive while sipping a coffee, smoking a cigarette, talking to your partner, and doing a lot of things. So when things become automatic, they've been consolidated. But then what happens is that sometimes the automatic thing doesn't work. And to learn something new, you have to unlearn what you learned before. You have to inhibit your first reaction, the first automatic reaction, because it doesn't work anymore. And in Zelda, for example, there are a few concrete examples of this used in a video game. So I would have liked to play, but it would have taken too much time. But at some point early in the game, you have bats coming at you. If you do nothing, if they hit you, you lose stamina. So the second time you encounter bats, you take your sword and you give a swing to it, and it works. You kill it. So next time you find when a bat comes at you, you kill it. And it becomes automatic. Every time a bat comes to you, you take your sword, you kill it, you're fine. And at some point, you have these new bats coming at you. And they are a bit more yellowish, and they have these little sparks. And so what you do the automatic thing. You take your sword, and you get electrocuted, because it's electric. They are electric bats. And so this mechanism, it's a play mechanism, it's quite fun, actually, but it's a very important mechanism of learning. This is how our brain works. And another example is with lakes. You can swim into every lake you encounter in Zelda. And at some point you have this lake, and the water is a little muddy, but you have this lake with a big trophy in the middle, and then small island in the middle. So again, you do the automatic thing. You get into the water and you die, because muddy water, you cannot swim in it. And so processes and mechanisms like space learning, interleaved learning, inhibition, and many dual coding, and all this already exist in the video games. And game designers use it without knowing what it is exactly, but they use it and they work, and they use it because they are very, very efficient. So I could go on and on with the examples, but I would just finish this boring part with the 4 pillars of learning as defined by Stanislas Dehaene, which is a French, famous French neuroscientist, who has defined the 4 pillars of learning as being attention, active engagement, feedback, and consolidation. So what's interesting to see is how video games do with all this. Did you have time to read? Yeah? I'm going to do it. Attention is so our ability to filter information is like when you are in a restaurant, for example, and you have many conversations around you, but you still manage to only hear and only listen to the person in front of you, or at least you are supposed to. So this ability to filter what's important for the task at hand is an essential part of learning. Same for active engagement. We know active engagement works better than anything else. We all know that what we hear, we memorize more or less 10% of what we hear, 20% of what we see, and up to 80 or 90% of what we do. So there's no question that active engagement is so much better for learning. And then there's feedback. Feedback is the whole idea of having the results of what you've done as soon as possible. That's why in the classical education system, when you get an exam one day and you get the results of the exam, or a test one day, and you get the results of the exam after 1-2 days or a week, I mean, pedagogically speaking, it's a nonsense. You should have a response right away, because otherwise, if you've made a mistake, you keep the mistake in your head for days or weeks. So it's not good. And the last thing, consolidation, as we've seen. So repeating, and you're getting things automatic, and you commit them to the long-term memory. So let's see how games do in all these aspects. Well, attention, as you have seen just a glimpse of how big a world is in Zelda, for example. But the open worlds are a nightmare for game designers, because the player can go anywhere. So, and you don't want him to go anywhere. You want him to go where you want him to go, to the next mission. So game designers have become really experts at focusing the attention of the player where they want it focused. When he gets out of the cave, so you have a cliff in front of you, you have a wall on your left, and they have pointed at an old guy on your right, and there's a small path on your right. Well, they obviously want you to go there. So basically, game designers are experts at attention. Active engagement, is the very base. It's the very essence of video games. It's interaction. So, opposed to some passive things like films or stuff. What defines video games is that you interact with the machine. So active is what video game is. And feedback, this is probably the most interesting. The game has to know at every moment what you do, where you are, etc., etc., etc. So not only, this is an area where definitely the technology is much better than a human. Because just imagine the best scenario in a classroom. A teacher can give feedback to one kid. Best case scenario, he can give feedback to a small group because he gave them the same task to all of them. But all the others will have to wait. And here we're talking about in a classroom of 30 people, for example. A video game technology can address millions of players at a time, every second. And not only that, so it's not only immediate, it's not only constant through the whole game. Every second of the game, you will get the feedback you need, but you can address millions of people at a time and give them a personalized response. So that's very important when we talk about learning, à la carte. What do you say that? And consolidation is what you do through the whole game. I mean, you learn things, you apply them, you reapply them, you reapply them, you combine them to reapply them, etc., etc. That's what you do. That's what gaming is. So there's one more thing I want to do, because it's not mentioned specifically, but it's on between the lines, you can read it, is an extrinsic motivation. That's something that game designers pay a lot of attention to, is based basically on the self-determination theory. So it's very important to give the player agency, competency, and relatedness. Agency is that the player has to feel like his actions have an effect on the world. What he does matter. And it's very important because you feel good. All this is about feeling good, actually. Competency, again, with the learning curve and the difficulty curve and all these missions you do one after the other, well, you get better at it. Even if you don't want it, even if you are a complete, well, not pro player at all, but in the end, you get better. And getting better at what you do makes you feel so good. And same for relatedness. Zelda, in this aspect, is not a very good example because it's a single-player game, but it's even more important with multiplayer games, that you really get a community of people with the same center of interest, who recognize each other, and you feel part of something bigger than you. And feeling parts of something bigger than you always feels extremely great. And in my very personal opinion, because there's a lot of controversy about video games being addictive and etc., but I think parts of the addiction, or the so-called addiction to video games, come from here, because game designers master this extremely well. So if we can get, as Ananta said earlier, people or kids or even grown-ups addicted to learning using the same technique, why not? Is it a bad thing to be addicted to reading books or to watching films? Okay, if we can get people to love playing games that will bring them with actionable knowledge and know-how and skills, I think it might not be a bad thing, actually. So, in the end, in short, what I deeply think is that games are nothing but active pedagogies in a digital form. So I could go on and why active pedagogies could be really useful to transform education for the 21st century, and why digital learning, what can digital learning bring, but I guess we have no time and we're going to switch to questions and answers. So just finish with that quote from Einstein that I love too. So this is the necessity of changing the education system, I think, to face the challenges, the incredibly complex challenges of the 21st century. So, yeah, that's it. And I'm going to finish with that. Thank you very much for your patience.
All right, thank you very much. Let's have a couple of really provoking questions. Challenging. What would you prefer? Would you prefer a number of questions and then answer them, or one at a time?
Oh, maybe one at a time.
Yeah, just like me.
Or no questions at all, and I can go smoke a cigarette.
I can't remember past the second question, so we'll go one at a time.
Hi, my name is Sakshi and I'm from psychology background. So I'm a student of psychology. So when I came for the lecture, I was like looking up for it. I really thought that there are going to be a lot of technical terms involved, but it was all psychology, so I'm really happy about that. I could understand it. So my question is that we see that, so I'm going for organizational psychology, trying to enter that corporate world. And we see that everything is moving to gamification, like you said, and hopefully learnification. But it's all sugar-coated. I was trying to understand how I can develop games, how I can learn, game development for HR. Because, that's what's happening right now. People are hiring through gamification. People are training through gamification. So how can we do that? I mean, I don't understand, developing games. I mean, I can't just do that. But what do I do to make sure that I'm not jobless in 5 years?
Well, this is the blessing and the curse of the video games industry, in fact. A lot of people need now game designers for all sorts of things. Game designers and people that know how to develop games. But the thing is that video games industry is so successful. They're making so much money doing stupidly violent and violently stupid games that they take everybody that comes from schools, basically, and they cannot hire fast enough. As a matter of fact, at Ubisoft, we have worldwide more than 1,000 jobs open. We would need to hire in the next year about 700 game designers, game developers, etc., artists, etc., etc., and we cannot find them. Well, it's difficult to find them. So it attracts so much people that there's no game designers left for the other areas. I'm sorry, but I don't know what's the solution to that. Except there are schools. Well, in India, there's one French school that has opened a subsidiary in India in Pune, and hopefully they will be part of the hub of Ananta UNESCO MGIEP's hub in Vizag. But apart from schools for game design, well, schools dedicated to the gaming industry or game design, etc., and having people from this school going outside the video games industry, I think is the best solution.
Psychologists, I mean, do you need us for your gamification and learnification?
Of course, we work. I mean, with this project, we work with neuroscientists, psychologists, the pedagogues that help us define all this.
Last question, but what are the specific skills that we need to develop right now to enter this industry, to enter this world which is going to be completely devoted to game development and learnification?
You mean to enter the video games industry?
Yeah, like what do I need to do? What is my next step? What do I need to learn? What do I need to develop in myself so that I can also enter the world tomorrow and say that I can help you in learnification, because I really want to do that.
I don't know. I think it's to be passionate, because this is something that this is something that we discover on the go. When I started the project, I have no idea about all this. So it's being passionate, being lucky, because you meet the right persons but there's still room for passionate people that have not necessarily, a very specific type of background, and especially for game designers. Even if there are schools of game designers now, but game designers for a long time has been something of people that just like games.
Just very quickly, because you were asking for jobs and stuff, and so there is, as Zigor said, there's a huge demand for game designers. I spent a whole day in a place called Valencia, about an hour and a half from Paris. It's the same university that's opened up a campus in Pune. And one of the things that I've realized is that they have animation, gaming, design stuff. But, and this is what I was mentioning to them, is that they don't have the pedagogy training. And so trying to link, especially when you want to get games for learning and fun games for learning, it's not as easy as, in fact, it's a lot more difficult than just developing a game. Because you'll have to, design learning outcomes. then you got to make it fun, then you got to get the animation, you got to get the gaming mechanics, and so there's a huge market out there. So that school is in Pune. It's called Rubika. You can check it out. They have a 3-year program. Then they have, in fact, now a 2-year program for people who come from other disciplines who want to get into gaming quickly and then start producing related with like psychology background or educational background.
Good evening. I'm Rakshak and I'm a game developer. These are two friends of mine. We all work together basically, and our job is to actually implement games, mobile games, video games inside classrooms. Now the example that you stated here of Zelda, I feel it's not the right example here because of, with a $10 million budget and with this joie de vivre.
10 million, no, 100 million at least.
Exactly. So, it's Link is not going to be doing fraction or multiplication, compound interest or several of those topics, but we are given the task to make that interesting. We are told to come up with a game that can make that kind of a journey for kids in the limited resources, inside a classroom where they can encounter those topics that they study in their books and then transform education, right? So I wanted to ask the both of you, is there a project or a video game that has had an academic impact which was worthy of your notice?
No, there is very few of those, or none of those. I think the best examples I know are games that have not been made for learning, but that have very good outcomes. And one of them has been developed by one single guy, and everybody knows it. It's Minecraft. So you don't have to be big to do big things, in fact. You still can do, even if it's harder and harder, because the big names of the video games industry invest more and more in their games, and a game now is extremely, a AAA game costs something between $50 and $100 million to build, but there's still room for small teams, and in the case of Minecraft, one single guy, to do a great game, and that has great outcome. So even, I don't know if Nintendo will enter the education area anytime soon. I don't think so. Nor any other big game developer or publisher in the planet, not in the following, well, in the next 5 or 10 years. But precisely, there's room for innovation, there's room for motivation, there's room for creation, so there's room for everybody, in fact. So go, keep on, keep up.
Hi, my name is Jibu. I'm a journalist. I have been covering technology for quite a few years now. And I have been covering many of the Indian startups which has been using technology, gamification and apps for learning, like Byju's, which many of you are familiar with.
Using or developing?
There are many apps right now in Indian market, which education apps, learning apps. So with they are like, one of them is even valued at about $700 million right now, estimated. So my question is, don't you think technology like AR, augmented reality, or not VR but AR, more beneficial towards learning than games? Because recently we had Apple coming up with new range of iPads. When they came up with that, they demonstrated one of the apps which was developed by a team in Bangalore. It's like you can cut open a frog and do all the surgical things on the frog, but it's through AR. So it's like, I agree with what the gentleman said there. It's like making the stuff you learn interesting. That's the first of the thing. So don't you think AR will be a better way going forward in terms of learning rather than...
No.
Why so?
The answer is no.
Why so?
No, I don't believe in AR very much in learning, because it's a passive process. I mean, you see things. you cannot interact yet with VR. Interactions in AR, sorry. The interactions in AR are extremely poor. It will happen, but so far, the AR technology is not there, I think, because I think the important thing, whatever the technology you use, AR, VR, regular game, is the interaction, is the action, is the fact to have active learning versus passive learning. AR today only offers passive learning, so not interested. I'm a bigger believer in VR, because in VR you can have interaction. You are when you enhance attention because you are in a completely closed world, and you have something that computers and video games on computers don't have, is the gestures. And you can do a lot in education. You can add a lot to education by gestures. So I'm a big believer in VR much more than AR. But again, the technologies are going to evolve. Within maybe 10 years' time, we'll have good AR and good interaction in AR. It's not the case at the moment, and I cannot see it happening in the next five years.
So I'm going to have about... What time are we supposed to have? 8 o'clock? 7. So maybe I think people are excited. This one. So yeah, we'll pay the extra bill, electric bill too. Right?
Hi, my name is Anubha, and by profession I'm a teacher. And my husband and I were like the way you started the lecture with, that you were depressed to see how the schools are functioning, how the classrooms are, and everything. So that is what being into the profession, even we feel so. So we thought of working on some innovative ways of educating and learning. But after this presentation, what I am still thinking and pondering over is that how can we incorporate something like gaming into the present scenario of education? How when education is so subjective, it is still so subjective. We're still working on curriculums which have been made in years and years back. How can we work? What can we do today to do something with this and amalgamate it with the present education system and create something new?
I'm afraid I cannot answer this question because I'm not a teacher, and so you will have to figure out. I mean, I can do applications that I believe are good applications for learning, but I cannot tell a teacher how to use it in his classroom. But something was not clear in my presentation because, but as Eric pointed out earlier on, I think one of the big challenges of education in 21st century is lifelong learning. So these sort of applications I'm talking about, these sort of applications that thinking, they are not necessarily focused on kids. I mean, we also look at solutions for grown-ups that with 50 years old will still need or want to learn something new. And so provide them a great platform, a fun platform to just have fun, doing that. So it's not only kids. And I will never tell a teacher how to do his class. I mean, it's not my job. And I think you will have to find ways.
So I'm going to suggest we play a game. See how fast you can make your question, how short you can make your question, and how much shorter that the response can be. And then the person who has the minimum wins the prize. So let's go.
What's the prize?
That's the game. That's the game.
You're not very motivated.
You don't know that. The rules is there are no rules.
My question is, how are you promoting those two games to your target?
Say again?
How are you promoting those two games to your target market, students?
We didn't start thinking of a business model.
No, it's not business. It's about spreading information to the students that there is a game which will help you to learn.
We're just in a phase of research for the moment. We're prototyping ideas. So for the moment, we're not thinking of what business model or how we're going to promote these games, or we don't even know if there is a target audience at all.
No,
So
basically, I believe all the students, like in the starting of their education, like first to high schools or something.
yeah, but this is something we'll see later on if the project goes on.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm
Hi.
Anushruti. My question is regarding violence in games. I want to know, is there any regulatory determinations that how much action should be there in games, and what do you think of Indian games?
Can you repeat the last part?
How
please?
much action should be there in games?
Action
is
or violence?
there regulatory parameters?
Well, as far as games for learning are concerned, violence and competition are not a good way of learning. So there's no need to have violence or competition. It's the opposite, actually. For learning purposes, collaboration is much more powerful than competition. So the games for learning will not be. Well, as I don't know, it's a matter of design. I mean, violence to a certain point can be fun. Believe it or not, it can be fun. So I know males in the assistants will understand what I say. But yes, it can be fun. So there's no limits or just like in films, you have violent films that can be fun as well. So there's no parameter or whatever.
Hello, sir. My name is Anurag. I'm a gamer and an engineer. So I wanted to ask about the current scenario of the gaming industry. We have seen games like Far Cry, Grand Theft Auto being such a massive blockbusters, and then the current scenario, the games like PUBG and Fortnite they have income of millions, billions. So is the future of the gaming industry going to be molded in shape that the aspects of games like PUBG and Fortnite are going to be implemented in the future of Far Cry as well? Is it going to be so, or as like these games are such a massive blockbuster, so more games of these sort are coming up in the market?
Oh yes.
So
you remember what I said about automatic things? Automatic process.
Yes, sir.
Well, they will do the same as long as it works.
Definitely,
as long as they make money out of it.
The essence of the games like Far Cry and Grand Theft Auto and other games we love to play, are they going to retain their originality, or they are going to be manipulated by the success of these games?
Who knows? I cannot speak for the future and for the development team.
Yeah, I think it's not about replacing the games that are there.
No.
No, it's not about that. It's just about sort of saying you could use the same game mechanics, the same rules, that the kind of parameters that games have, immersive, interactive, bringing in collaboration, could be useful in the educational sector for learning. That's it. It's not to compete with Assassin's Creed and sort of say you're going to be wiped out, or replacing it and say those should not be made. I think those will be continued, and it's just about another new emerging market. Seems to be well suited for gaming, and that's the dialogue that we are having here. I'll slowly move that way.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay. Even though I'm not that young, but so I come from a policy background, and I have significant knowledge in economics, especially behavior economics. I just wanted to ask that one of the learning abilities that we get from gaming is the ability to make choice. And I think some people even mentioned...
And to experiment.
Exactly. And if I'm playing a game like Grand Theft Auto, my learned friend mentioned, then it gives me a choice to kill a prostitute on the street. So on the behavioral nudge side of things, where developers like you can nudge us into learning one thing or not, where do we draw the line? And that's where the question that my friend asked comes into picture, that how do we create that regulatory environment to regulate you from forcing us to go into a particular direction? I want that liberty to be with me and make that choice on my own. And the only thing that matters is for me to retain that liberty based on my own principles. I'm talking very philosophical, but my idea is not to be nudged in the negative way. So there are games like Far Cry, there are games like Grand Theft Auto. At the same time, there are games like my friend develops, which is more on a very general, very primary way of learning math. I'm aware of several games that actually help people make decisions properly, that are made by governments. Like the Behavioral Insights team in London is preparing a game for people to ensure that they are, like consumers, are aware of their protection rights. That's fair. But games like Grand Theft Auto are not something that help me get nudged towards a positive choice.
Don't play them.
No, but how does the government ensure that wrong people don't play, or people like me who are intrigued are not playing them? So
you would like the government to tell the video game developers or publishers what they can publish or not? This is what you're saying?
Maybe that, yeah. In a different way, but there has to be some sort of a filter for developers.
Well, at least for video games for education, well, what Amanda said earlier is going to propose to implement, a set of guidelines, and I think that's very positive for games for learning. For regular games, I'm not so sure. I still want to have the possibility to play stupidly violent games, because every so often, when it feels good.
There's no autocorrect method for developers like you, that you wouldn't want to do it in that way.
Oh no, nobody would want to do it. They will fight it as hard as they can.
Unless we put them through the socio-emotional learning program and then create the Gandhi neural networks. All right. Would you like to, very quick, we are going slowly.
Good evening. My name is Tanya Fredericks. I'm from the EU delegation in the Department on Research and Innovation. So, of course, I understand that this is all scientifically sustained, what you are promoting here. But I have not understood, excuse me, is this meant to replace the way your kid of 4 years has to learn? Or is this an additional tool to develop certain skills? Could you see, for example, a whole law education being learned through fun learning? So is it an additional tool?
I don't think what it's going to be so far, but my ideal thing is that it would be both, because I cannot imagine kids with 4-year-old kids like my son with a VR set in his head and spending hours on it. I don't want that for my kid. Nobody wants that for his kid. So I think if the role of education is to prepare the young generations to face what they're going to face when they are adults, I think one of the roles of education, of schools, is to introduce, IT, information technologies into kids, because they're going to have to live with that for their whole life. And it's going to be their main tools, and their main environment is going to be digital. So in this phase of introducing to kids, yes, applications like this one or others can come as a support, right? But in the lifelong learning perspective, who could afford in a physical way to implement universities and school open 24/7 and with data and learning always up to date in every language in the world? Nobody could do that. You can do it with technology. So I think, why not? I'm not saying this is going to happen. I'm not saying this is what I want to happen. But we could imagine perfectly a platform, kind of a mix between a game and something like Roblox or Minecraft with user-generated content. A game, but then at some point, the users add content. The good users themselves add content into the game. And there's an example which is has been very inspiring for me, is a game called Folded. It's a very basic, not stupid, but not very fun to play game called Folded. And it teaches you somehow how to fold molecules, well, how the folding of molecules work. And there was these researchers working on AIDS, and they had a problem with the molecules where they couldn't solve. And they've been years, they tried to solve this problem for years. And one of them had the idea, why don't we submit our problem to the community of players of this game, Folded? They found the solution in 3 weeks. So this kind of platforms could also permit links, bridges between players who have fun playing and researchers. I mean, the result of playing could end up having outcomes for the greater good of, because it's collective power, it's collective intelligence and collective power. Put that to use. Instead of using AIs, use our collective power. And it's not the only example, Folded. There's another one, same kind of example, where a community of users will, just for the sake of it, just for fun, but they will solve really important problems that could save lives and could make our lives better. And these kind of platforms permit that. So the model is not really there. Nobody has found the model or the business model. But I think we need to get there, but not with the kids. But this can happen later in the process.
All right, I'm going to close off with one last question, because if not, I think she'll do an Assassin's Creed somewhere along in Delhi, so I'm going to let her have the last question.
Thank you so much. So I actually have a very basic but pertaining question. So as a background, I'm a journalist.
Creating this virtual encounter place, virtual agora. So you can imagine, yes, this is quite playful, and you can imagine people exchanging information in this virtual place with virtual characters that represent you, etc., etc. But then what's the validity of that? What's the credibility of this information? We know from the examples of the last few months with fake news and all these things that the source of the news is important, and you need to trust the source of the news. So I'm not sure gamifying information is a good thing, but again, this is very personal. And to gamify a classroom, yes, this has been done for over 100 years, and you don't need technology for that. These active pedagogies were around, were invented somehow in the early 20th century. Now in the 1920s. And so these guys were already gamifying. Montessori, Piaget, all these people were already gamifying classrooms. So there's nothing new in all this. The new thing with brackets is that it gets into a digital form. But if you're interested in gamifying classrooms, go to active pedagogies, Montessori, Freinet, De Crowley, all these people.
Well, I could create a market here for questions and see how much people are willing to pay. But no, that's a different resource mobilization model for the Institute. Well, I would like to thank you, Zigor, for...
Thank you, Nanta.
Thank you very much for coming and taking time out to come and spend this time with us. I hope it was productive. And we normally have this twice a year. And I've been told to... there's tea outside. I guess more than tea as well. Refreshments. So please help yourself, mingle. Zigor is there to, those who had more questions to ask him, please do that. But before I let you go, please come to WISAC. It's November 15, 16, and 17th. We will have a lot of some of the world's best experts coming and talking in the conference. We are also having workshops. I think Unity is going to have a 1.5-day workshop for teachers on how to do simple games for maths and science using the Unity platform. I think we'll have Microsoft again doing another teachers workshop. We also want to bring in kids, have a hackathon in terms of developing games. So there will be a lot of series of activities in WISAC in November. I guess everybody knows what WISAC is, because I can't pronounce the full name. So yeah, there you go. All right. Thank you very much.